One other point where the borders, U.S. states of North Dakota and Minnesota come together is the tiny Canadian town of Emerson, Manitoba. As the United States has tightened some immigration rules over the past few years, hundreds of people have illegally crossed the border there to seek asylum in Canada. In part one of our three-part series, Taking Flight, VOA senior analyst Jeffrey Young visited this isolated place to see the situation firsthand.
All along the border between the United States and Canada, no walls or barbed wire fences mark where the two nations come together, just a cleared space. Right on the border is Emerson, Manitoba, a town of just over 600 people, but a magnet for those seeking asylum in Canada. Sergeant Corey Myers is with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police.
During the summer months, our numbers are generally higher. In the dead of winter, the numbers will go down.
Myers says about 1,000 people illegally crossed into Canada at Emerson in 2017, many of them Somalis coming from the U.S. city of Minneapolis, Minnesota, 640 kilometers to the south. Across Canada last year, more than 18,000 people illegally entered to claim asylum. Those who cross the border to Canada at Emerson officially do so at a major U.S. highway just west of town. But unofficially, some will try to go up the Red River, which runs through the town, or walk along the railroad tracks, both headed to Winnipeg. For a short stretch east of Emerson, the international boundary is a dirt road. The real barrier to reaching Emerson from the U.S. is the weather, especially in winter. U.S. Customs and Border Protection Agent Aaron Heitke.
Oftentimes what we've seen in the last few years is they pick the worst possible weather, and when you talk about the worst possible weather in North Dakota, it's 35, 40 below zero. It's a 60-mile-an-hour wind. And so frostbite, hypothermia is a very significant risk.
Not just in winter. In June 2017, 57-year-old Ghanaian Mavis Ototie died from hypothermia. Her body was found in a field south of the Canadian border. CPP agent Heike says she was brought there by a human trafficker. Sadly, he says, she could have entered Canada legally. On both sides, officers try to make sure people survive if they are found crossing the border illegally.
Once we get them out of the elements, then we will formally arrest them for illegally entering Canada and take them into our custody.
Then they are moved to the province's capital, Winnipeg, to await hearings on their asylum requests. Many of those asylum seekers and others immigrating to Canada are helped in Winnipeg by the Manitoba Interfaith Immigration Council, a nonprofit advocacy group that addresses the legal, housing, and employment needs of asylum seekers. Their welcome place is covered in the next segment of Taking Flight.
Well, joining me now to discuss his three-part Taking Flight series is VOA senior analyst Jeffrey Young. Jeff, welcome to Africa 54. And start by sharing with us your experience of being there and really walking that route.
Vince, to get an idea as to what it's like for Somalis and the other people who try to enter Canada illegally, I went to Emerson, Manitoba, this little town of 622 people, and I stayed there for days. And part of my experience there was crossing back over to the U.S. side and parking my car several kilometers south of the Canadian border and walking the fields in the middle of the night, walking the railroad tracks, walking the banks of the Red River, where one Somali a couple of years ago swam to a new life in Canada by swimming in the river until he crossed to the Canadian side.
What are some of the risks that you witnessed there? I mean, someone may think it's a river, I know how to swim, I can do it, I can walk across.
Well, you've got the weather. Your weather's the biggest enemy. When I was there, the weather was above zero. But in the middle of winter, and winter in that part of the United States and Canada, winter starts in October and it ends in April. And we're talking about, at its worst, minus 40. And these people are brought to just below the border, a couple of kilometers below the border, and they're just kicked out of the car by the human traffickers or whoever brought them there. And then they walk through the fields. They walk along the banks of the river, and it's the middle of the night. And they freeze. People die.